Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host, Amy Dash. You were just listening to the testimony of a forensic analyst who was charged with sampling materials at the scene and even in the house of the victim, Nicole Vander Hayden. I'm joined by our Law and Crime trial analyst, Ronn Blitzer. Thanks for being with me.
Good to be here.
Did you think, when they were trying to lead this forensic analyst towards testifying about whether he sampled certain things, you know, they were talking about some drain pipes in the house. Obviously, not everything can be sampled, right? They have to identify what could be critical evidence to try to prove the crime that took place. The fact that the victim was dumped 3 miles from the home, why is it still important to sample things inside the home?
Because you want to make sure that you want to try and paint a picture of everything that may have happened that night. So, you want to take a look at what was in the home to see if there is any evidence that could point to someone in particular. Her boyfriend was initially looked at as a suspect. So, if they're analyzing everything in the home, they want to see if there's anything there that could give them some insight as to what happened that night.
Yeah, like for example, if he had brought anything into the home with him that could have left some evidence behind that could implicate him in the crime, because we know that the defense's theory is that he in fact committed the crime, that he found his girlfriend outside of the home in a car with George Burch, who is the defendant in this case. He was so infuriated by them being together that he allegedly, this is the defense's theory, killed his girlfriend, knocked out George Burch. When George Burch came to, the defense is saying that he had a gun to his face and made George Burch dump the body. But that doesn't really explain the DNA all over her body from George Burch and the lack of evidence from her boyfriend being on that scene.
And that's why we have Burch on trial now instead of the boyfriend, Douglas Detry. He was initially arrested, as we know, and he was looked at. He was investigated by police, ultimately released after a couple weeks. Before Burch was then arrested a while later. But again, it wasn't just Burch making this up out of thin air saying, as the only one trying to pin this on Detry. The police were looking into him. And when they're responding to this, when they're investigating it, they want to see what happened inside the house. And maybe he was behind it. Ultimately, they decided he wasn't. But when you're trying to investigate what's going on, you want to be as thorough as possible, even though she was found, I think, 3 miles away from the house. If there's anything inside the house that could help them out, that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, and now I believe there is a neighbor on the stand, so let's listen to what that neighbor has to say.
So I'm going to give you a pointer here. If you could, for the jury, once it's displayed here, could you point out the location of your residence? I'm sorry, could you? Yep. So for the record, there appear to be 5 houses on that exhibit. Yours is in the furthest to the bottom and left. Is that correct?
Correct.
And are you also familiar with a neighbor of yours, Douglas Detry?
Yes.
And you're familiar with where that gentleman lives? Is that also depicted in this photograph?
Correct.
For the record, you're pointing at the top leftmost residence. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Have a seat. Directing your attention to May 21st of 2016. Do you recall that day?
Yes, I do.
And what about that day sticks out to you?
I went out to mow my lawn at about 10 in the morning and came upon an area in front of my yard that was had a significant amount of blood.
And where was this area specifically?
It was abutting the curb at the very, very front of the yard, almost directly in front of my home.
Do you want him to show that on the photograph? Why don't we put the photograph back on the big screen and he can point that out with the pointer?
Approximately here.
It's approximately in the middle of the photograph to the left edge at the grass line and the curb. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And at that point, did you locate anything else in your yard?
Not immediately. I did proceed to begin mowing my lawn, and on the very first pass of mowing my lawn close to the curb, I heard a click. It was sounded like my blade of my lawnmower hitting something, and I shut my lawnmower off and found a piece of cord that I picked up and examined and then set aside.
Mr. Peterson, I'm showing you two exhibits marked 65 and 66. Could you identify each of those documents for us?
65 is a view from the street of my yard, including the portion of the curb that still has blood stains and a piece of cord. And Exhibit 66 is a close-up view of some of those blood spots on the curb and a piece of cord.
Do both of those exhibits appear to be fair and accurate depictions of the observations you made on May 21st of 2016?
Yes, they do.
I move to admit exhibits 65 and 66 at this time.
Subject to cross, any objection to 65 and 66 being received?
No objection.
65 and 66 are received.
And permission to publish, Your Honor.
They can be published on the big screen.
And welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. We were just listening to testimony from two neighbors who were there next to the home of the victim and her boyfriend. And one of them said that he actually saw blood on the front yard the morning that she was reported missing. Ron, what were some other key facts that you thought came out of this testimony that could have shed some light on whether there were actually problems at home and whether Doug Dietrich could have been involved?
Yes, so like you said, there was the blood that was found there. That definitely struck me. But what really made me think about Doug Dietrich more is not as much what we were just hearing now, but some of his own testimony that we heard yesterday. He was trying to give his account of what happened the day before his girlfriend was reported missing, when she had first gone missing. And he was talking about heated exchanges that they were having over the phone and over text messages, where she was accusing him of being abusive and cursing at him, and then him talking about how he couldn't get a hold of her after a while, but still didn't really claim to be concerned over her well-being and took his time in actually reporting this. I think that, more than a lot of the other evidence that I've seen, kind of made me question him a little bit.
Yeah. And so there was also text messages that were exchanged between him and his girlfriend in the hours leading up to her going missing and being murdered. What do those indicate to you in terms of his potential guilt or innocence? We know he's not on trial, but the defense's theory is that he was the one that orchestrated the murder.
Exactly. The defense is pointing to him. Police were looking at him initially, and he admitted that he was getting text messages from his girlfriend, or at least from her phone, in the hours before she went missing, and they were very accusatory, accusing him of being abusive, of cheating on her. And
but does that equate with murder?
Oh, absolutely not. But when he's talking about this, it seemed a little hazy at times, and yeah, it could have been because he admittedly was drinking heavily that night. He was also using marijuana, he said. So that could have dealt with some of his memory issues there. But first he would say, I wasn't really responding to this, and then he, when pressed, went into a little bit more detail about how he responded, and it didn't always come off as believable to me. So I think that's something that...
Because he was almost too ignorant as to why she would react in the way that she did.
Yeah, he claimed to not...
Something had to have been
exactly.
going on, I think.
Yeah, he claimed to not know why she was accusing him of these things, but also didn't appear to be so concerned, even though he was also trying to get a hold of her constantly. He claimed that he wasn't worried about her well-being, but then talked about how he was looking for her and talking to people at one of the bars trying to figure out where she had gone.
Yeah.
But then when he came home at 2 a.m. and she wasn't there...
Didn't look for her then.
Yeah, didn't look for her anymore.
Woke up again at 6 a.m, didn't look for her again.
Didn't look for her then, didn't even try calling her at that point. Didn't even call the police until after he had already spoken to her family. And this time it's later in the day at this point before he reports her missing.
Yeah.
So there was just a lot between what he said on the stand compared to what he said happened that didn't really add up to me.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to listen to him on the stand, Douglas Dietrich, reading those text messages that he exchanged with his girlfriend in the hours before she was killed.
The last area of questioning was that Nikki had left the watering hole with a group of your friends. And do you know about how long after Nikki left the watering hole did you or Greg start to receive some information that you should come down to the sardine can?
I don't exactly recall if she had said something about the sardine can in the short phone conversation we had, but probably received some text from her, I don't know, I'm guessing 15, 20 minutes after that point.
In your short phone conversation that you had with Nikki while you were still at the watering hole, was she at the sardine can at that time?
No, I remember her saying, I think they were in the parking lot in the car about to leave.
Was Nikki upset with you at that point in time?
No, she didn't seem to be.
Shortly thereafter, you indicated that you received some text messages.
Yes.
At some point, did Nikki send you a series of angry text messages?
Yes, she did.
Do you recall the content of those angry text messages?
I don't specifically recall exactly what they were. I know that, or I don't know, I don't really want to guess, but they're like, what girl am I talking to, or something on the lines of that, and some other comments that I didn't know where they were coming from. And
is it fair to say that some of those text messages were really rather upset or derogatory?
yes, they were.
This may not be pleasant, but if I read them to you, can you tell me whether or not that was a text message you believe she sent?
Yes.
Do you believe that at around 11:12 p.m. she sent you a text asking you, quote, "So what bitch you with"?
Yeah, that rings a bell, yes.
Do you recall her sending a text message that said, "Fuck you, abusive asshole"?
Yes.
Do you recall her sending a message that said, quote, "Wow, what slut are you with? Because none of your friends know"?
Yes, I do.
And another one that said, "I am not surprised. How many times have your dick been off for some whore"?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall responding to Nikki's text messages?
I believe I received those all like as a bunch grouped together that I had missed, that I had not looked at the phone in a few minutes or however long it was, and saw them all, and I responded back something kind of nicely, just trying to diffuse and maybe calm her down, because she seemed upset from the content of her text.
Was your response to her an angry response?
No, it wasn't. I wasn't upset.
How did it make you feel when you heard those text messages?
I was kind of puzzled. I didn't know what she was thinking, or I didn't know what was going on, you know.
Did Nikki continue to send derogatory text messages to you?
Yeah, I believe she sent some more after that.
Do you recall getting a text message that said, quote, "Sure, you still love whores"?
Yeah, something like that, yep.
And do you recall what your response was to that?
I think I did like an LOL or something like that back to her, and like, are you joking? Are you kidding? What's going on here? I didn't get it.
Do you recall her sending you a text saying, quote, "Yup, I learned lots"?
Yep.
And quote, "Why else you so fucking retarded"?
Yeah.
Do you recall responding to that text message?
I don't know what text I specifically responded to it at what point, but I did respond back here and there, when I did look at my phone and noticed that she was still, texting me, and I don't know at what point I tried calling her too, and
Do you recall if any of your responses to her text messages were angry responses?
No.
Do you recall using a vulgar language with her in response?
No.
And why did you not respond in a vulgar or upset way?
Well, I wasn't upset, and I think I just kind of thought she was upset for an unknown reason, and that there wasn't really a reason for it.
And in fact, is it fair to say your responses were, you mentioned LOL or LOL, stop it, Nikki,
Yep.
and then just saying that you would be there soon or find her?
Yep, that I'd meet her at the sardine can or whatever. I'll be there soon.
Do you recall if the derogatory text messages then continued even after that?
I believe they did, yes.
And at any point in response to those messages, did you get upset with Nikki?
No, I didn't.
In fact, at one point she did send a text message that said, "You hurt me all the time."
Yes, she did.
And welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. We were just listening to Doug Dietrich talk about text messages that he exchanged with his girlfriend in the hours leading up to the murder. Apparently, Ronn Blitzer, they were fighting, right?
Yeah. He doesn't claim to really understand why, but he's ready to talk about how he was getting all these text messages from Nicole, accusing him of cheating, accusing him of being abusive, just generally being angry at him and just ranting at him. But he then says that he didn't really respond so much and kind of ignored it, or tried to playfully play it off. But he doesn't really give the indication that he thinks that there's something strange about this.
Yeah, I mean, they were both drinking, right? That was the context of the situation, is they're in bars together. She leaves one bar, goes to another bar, so presumably they're both drunk and emotional. We can presume that much safely, right?
Yeah, for sure. He talked about how he was drinking pretty heavily, doing shots, having drinks, and he was pretty inebriated, and he assumed that she was too. But it's still a pretty questionable situation here, the way that he presents it anyway.
Yeah, does the fact that he was drunk justify at all that he didn't try to look for her sooner than he actually did?
Personally, I don't think so. I mean, you could say, well, he wasn't in his right mind. He, looked for her a little bit. He was exhausted by the time he got home at 2 a.m. He did ask the babysitter if she had heard anything. He said that later in his testimony that before he went to sleep around 3 a.m., he called the babysitter again to see if she had any update, and she didn't. But then the next day he took his time, but he claimed he was really hungover. And yeah, I get, you're drunk, then you're hungover. But if your girlfriend who you live with is missing, I feel like that would kind of get him to rally and kind of go into action.
Yeah. Now, what about motive, the importance of motive? So Mr. Burch is basically saying, well, I didn't have a motive, to kill her. But Douglas Dietrich, you did. But what would his motive be? I still don't see what Doug Dietrich's motive would be.
Well, the motive, if we're looking at this testimony here, if you don't believe what he's saying entirely, then you could have a motive of they're not getting along well, that, she is, sending him all these horrible messages, and maybe he, did say different things to her if he got a hold of her over the phone. We don't know that for sure. We don't know.
But it's hard to justify a motive just from an argument.
Absolutely. But, Burch's whole theory going into this, what he's trying to put forward is that, he was with Nicole that night, and that Dietrich's motive was that he caught them. He caught them together, and in a jealous rage, killed her and then threatened him. So that's his motive. We're going to wait to see what the defense does when they present their case to kind of flesh out that theory as much as they can. But, if you buy into Burch's version of events, that's the motive there.
Now, Burch's DNA was on her, but also his Google dashboard showed that he was at the location potentially where the body was dumped. How reliable do you think that data is? Because there's certainly grounds to question it, because it's technology. It's flawed.
Yeah, technology is flawed, and both sides are going to present witnesses to, we're starting to hear from the prosecution's experts, and the defense is going to have their experts to try and poke holes in this. But there could be any number of reasons why Burch was there at the home. He, could have, been with Nicole that night and given her a ride home. And maybe something did or didn't happen between the two of them that night, but he could have given her a ride home, and that would explain why he was there. And according to him, if he was in his car there and then they were caught by Dietrich, then that could explain something. There are any number of reasons why he could have been there. It could have been that he himself did commit this crime and did it there and then brought her body elsewhere, or it could have been any number of reasons that we'll hear from the defense.
Yeah, so if you look at both sides of it, what Burch is saying is, well, Dietrich caught us sleeping together outside, so therein is his motive to kill her out of rage and jealousy. And on the flip side, the prosecution is saying, well, Burch met her, and this was just a random killing where perhaps he raped her and then decided that he would kill her afterwards as a result of that.
Right.
So let's listen to some more of Douglas Dietrich's testimony on the stand as he recounts what his relationship was like with the mother of his child, with his girlfriend, just before she went missing and was found dead.
Did you respond angrily to that?
No, I don't believe so.
In fact, at some point you responded asking her to call you?
Yeah.
And it was apparent from the text message that Nikki was upset with you.
Yeah, and I was kind of just puzzled, and I was talking with friends and, enjoying the night, and I didn't know why she was texting me that way.
And where were you when you were receiving these text messages?
At the watering hole. I don't know where exactly at the watering hole, either between the bar or outside, and in between, talking to various friends, and Greg, Katie, and ran into another group of friends that I hadn't seen in quite some time, and talked with them out by the front bar for, I don't know, I think it was 20-30 minutes probably, and had some more drinks there, and had another round of shots or two.
And during this time, obviously Nikki's texts are accusatory. Who were you with when you were at the watering hole continuing to have drinks?
I was with Greg, and I believe Katie was still there for a while, and there's some other people that we had ran into. There's an Andrea and her husband, I believe, and I think maybe one or two of their friends that I didn't know, that they're just kind of hanging out by the bar, and another, a Steve that I had known from way back in high school.
At some point in time, you decide to leave the watering hole?
Yes.
Do you know how that came about that you left?
Well, it was, it was one of those things we were kind of like on the way out to leave, and that's when we ran into that group of friends, and then we got chit-chatting, and 5 minutes turned into 20-30 minutes, and we're like, well, let's get going. And then I was getting those messages and looked at my phone, and it's like, we got to get going here. Let's go to the sardine can and meet up with everybody.
And when you say let's go, who was the other person that you were
with Greg.
Who was driving from the watering hole to the sardine can?
Greg was.
Is there a reason why Greg drove as opposed to you?
Well, I was pretty intoxicated, so I wasn't going to drive.
And where was your car at that time?
It was parked up in the back side parking lot of the watering hole.
When you left with Greg, did Greg come and pick you up?
I don't really recall if I remember walking outside for a little bit, and I don't know where his car was exactly, but he got into his car and left. So
Prior to leaving the watering hole, at any point in time while at the watering hole, did you use any substance other than alcohol?
At the watering hole, I believe during the show, I think I did take a puff off this pen type deal, a smoking device or whatever.
And what do you believe was in that device?
I think it was marijuana in there, or a mix of marijuana and tobacco.
Any other substances at the watering hole?
No.
It's fair to say you were pretty intoxicated, though.
Yes, I was. I was drinking pretty heavily.
On the ride from the watering hole to the sardine can, did you have any contact with Nikki?
Yes, I tried calling her, and I think there was a time she didn't answer, and then she answered, and then she was like very ecstatic and wasn't making any sense. And I don't know, I talked to her for like 30 seconds, and like it wasn't, I don't know, she wasn't making any sense. So I handed the phone to Greg and said, "Here, talk to Nikki. She's not making any sense to me." And then Greg tried to talk to her for a few minutes, and I don't know, I don't recall what Greg was really saying. I think he asked, "Where are you?" And he said something about that she was walking somewhere, and that he had asked, "Where are you? We'll pick you up and go wherever." And
So Nikki was pretty upset and animated with you?
yeah, and it was just like her words weren't making any sense. She was just like kind of ecstatically yelling, and she was upset.
Did hearing that make you angry?
No, I was just trying to calm her down, and she just wasn't listening. I mean,
And then at some point you gave the phone to Greg,
yep.
and he didn't have any luck in calming her down either?
No. So we even pulled over for a while he was on the phone a few blocks down off of Velp. It was a buddy of mine's old house, and we thought he actually still lived there. And we had pulled up by the driveway, and then somebody actually came out. I remember that somebody came out, and we're like, "Oh, that's not Josh's house." And we left, and that was somewhere right there is when Greg said she either hung up on him or her phone, just it died out.
And welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. You just heard Doug Dietrich talking about how he was trying to communicate with his girlfriend, Nicole Vanderhayden, who was visibly upset. She had some suspicions that he was cheating on her. He had other friends who were with her at another bar who also indicated that she was emotional upset about something pertaining to their relationship. And one friend even said that she fled the bar. And people tried to find her, tried to catch up with her. According to Doug, he's circling around in cars looking for her, but she's nowhere to be found. And we know she later ends up dead in a ditch, unfortunately. I'm here with Law and Crime trial analyst Ronn Blitzer. Ron, do you think that, forget about the context of what he's saying, do you think his demeanor was believable on the stand? He's not very emotional, but he's also not very cold. He's sort of matter-of-fact about it.
Right. So I actually do think his demeanor was pretty believable. I talked about a little earlier about how some of what he said didn't seem to jive with other things that he said, but the way he said it did come off as authentic, and that's something that we're used to analyzing during these trials. When you have someone who is a suspect or was a suspect or a person of interest, trying to get a sense of what they're saying when they're taking the stand. Here, I actually thought that he came off as rather genuine, if not a little bit stoic, and that does make him a little bit more believable. Also, as we talked about, he was arrested in connection with this crime, so police investigated him. A lot of times in these trials, defense attorneys like to talk about how the police or sheriff's office or whomever in these cases ignored someone who was the real killer and didn't really do a thorough job. That's not the case here. Dietrich, is the guy that Burch is pinning this whole thing on, but the police did investigate him. They talked to him. So as much as we're seeing of his account right now, police got to see plenty of that before. So if they talked to him and they heard his story and they believe that he didn't do it, and they said that he was very cooperative, if they bought his story, then that also leads me to believe that he wasn't behind this.
What about the fact that he had at least two friends testify to back up his story about looking for his girlfriend, about how emotional she was about her fleeing from the bar? Does that help him at all?
Absolutely. It's one thing to say, I was at a bar, I was drunk, I tried looking for her as best as I could. But when you say, oh, I was with Greg, I was with him, we went from one bar to another, we were together, we were in his car as he was driving me to look for her, that certainly helps him a lot.
Yeah, definitely. So now we're going to listen to a little bit more testimony from Doug Dietrich. I want to thank you, Ronn Blitzer, for joining me. I know you have to get back to your excellent work on our website, which everybody should check out, lawandcrime.com. So now let's listen to some more testimony, and we are awaiting a verdict also, I should say, in the Donald Smith trial out of Florida. He was convicted of raping and killing an 8-year-old girl, and the jury is now deliberating in the penalty phase over whether to put him to death. But for now, let's listen to some more testimony from the George Burch trial from Doug Dietrich.
Those were all unsuccessful.
Correct.
Were you ultimately able to have contact with Dallas on the ride home?